Hello everyone, this is week 7 of Philosophy 67, right? Political philosophy, and we are doing this week, we are speaking about the prison, right? I mean, slavery and the prison, that's the way I call the class today, this week, and then the prison extended to society as a whole, which is what comes from the work by Michel Foucault, one of the uh, thinkers that we are studying this week. The other person is the other thinker is Angela Davis. So we are doing uh, sections from Michel Foucault, his book called Discipline and Punish, the birth of the prison, right? This is the book, and then also two chapters you should read from Angela Davis, Are Prisons Obsolete? And because again, with the video right situation, in the face-to-face would be different situation, but I will perhaps speak more about some moments in the Foucault, in the book by Foucault, and but remember that what you had to do, first of all, let me say that again, just to review what we had done so far, right? We started this semester with the question of sovereign power and the dialectical subversions of it, right? I mean, we saw the work by Thomas Hobbes, Leviathan, chapters from Leviathan, the formulation of the theory of sovereignty, sovereign power, and then we also saw Carl Schmitt, right? I mean, from the concept of the political and political theology, then we got into Hegel's dialectic of master and slave. So the subversion of that paradigm of sovereign power, and then Karl Marx, the question of alienation, the question of labor as commodity, and so on. Still, the dialectical, right, subversion of relations of power, right, power relations, and then we got into part two of the class. We are still that in that part. This is week 3, week 7, but it is week 3 of section 2, part 2. Okay, so, and the title of this section is Capture and Lines of Flight, the Prison and the Camp. Right, so we spoke about feminism, the question of women's work, so-called class and gender. We spoke about, right, the question of colonialism and decolonization with Fanon, especially the chapter from The Rage of the Earth concerning violence. But I also said, read those chapters that I assigned in the syllabus from Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. Watch the movie The Battle of Algiers by Gillo Pontecorvo. Read also the speech given by Thomas Sankara, right, on the question of death. And then today we do this, the question of the prison, precisely slavery and prisons. I repeat, the prison extended to society as a whole. We will see what this means today, especially today, in the situation that we are in right now of this kind of global lockdown in all countries, all societies, because of course, the virus and so on. The terrible situation with the pandemic, with the coronavirus pandemic. Okay, so but in any case, remember to do the journal entry weekly, right? I mean, this time again, I suggest as a pointer, but you can choose any other. As always, I say, quote from relevant quote from the text, any other theme, problem arising from the material to write something on. And because the journal entry is all you're doing this semester, maybe try to spend a little more time on it. Okay, elaborate a little on it. Okay, so one option that I offer, that I suggest, is to write on Angela Davis quote that I'm reading, from page 19. It has become, right, so much a part of our lives that it requires a great feat of the imagination to envision life beyond the prison, right? So this is from her book called Are Prisons Obsolete, with a question mark, and the idea is, right, I mean, she's speaking about this ideal situation, right, this possibility of the abolition of the prison industrial complex of the prison as such, right? The prison, which is seen by Davis, other writers as well, as an extension of slavery, right, into contemporary society, right? So, but in any case, read chapters 1 and 2 from Angela Davis, then maybe I will say a few more words about that. But also, let me say that I had forgotten to upload that material, but I had done it now, so you can read it, right? So, in any case, ora you can choose option 2. Again, this is one suggestion coming from the book by Michel Foucault, Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison, but you can write about any other relevant quote, passage from that book or any other of the themes. There are many problems arising from it, okay? So the quote that I chose is very short, on page 200 you find this very short sentence, which is visibility is a trap. What does that mean? What is the meaning of that today? I say, especially in today's enhanced society of control and surveillance, because one of the important themes in Foucault, this is a book that he wrote in the late 1970s, right, about the question of the control society of control, the emerging paradigm back then emerging of surveillance, which is today much more, of course, developed, much more sophisticated and enhanced. As we know, we do live in a society of control, digital surveillance, and so on. So think about what that means in terms of also the idea that we find in Foucault, that the prison is no longer, the jail, the penitentiary, and so on and so forth, not only the institutional place designated as such, but it is rather, in many ways, and we can say in virtual ways today, extended to society as a whole. In a sense, the prison is everywhere. Okay, what does that mean? So, in any case, think about this, and I want to start maybe by, I ask you to read, in the book by Foucault. And you don't have to read everything, but certainly read from part 1. Part 1 is called Torture, and so read from page 3 to page 31. That's the first chapter of the first part. Again, the part is called Torture. The first chapter is called The Body of the Condemned, in which, as you will see, Foucault begins with the gruesome description of the execution of, in 1757, I believe, of Damien, this guy who tried to kill the king of France, Louis XV. He actually doesn't even succeed, but then he is publicly executed, and the execution also involves this torture and terrible, right, torture and dismemberment of his body as well. So you read that, the first few pages, really graphic, violent, but it's important also because in those pages, on those pages, Foucault is using the material, right, from articles from the time in which the situation is not only described, but they are articles that are written even before the execution takes place. So they are the articles that prescribe the situation that is going to take place. Okay. In any case, maybe I will say a few more words later, but that's a very important moment at the outset of the book. Then he moves on. So read that chapter, then read also chapter um, 2, right from chapter 1 from part 2. Part 2 is called punishment. Chapter 1 is called generalized punishment, in which you will see that precisely punishment becomes generalized, general. It is a kind of a pre-punishment. People are punished even before they do something, right? So that the punishment itself becomes more effective. We'll speak more about that in a moment. So that is the second chapter that you have to read. So chapter 1 from part 1, chapter 1 from part 2, and then also read the chapter called Docile or Docile, Docile, docile bodies, obedient bodies, very important concept in Foucault. Okay, that is chapter 1 from part 3, which is called Discipline. And then also, again, we are not reading everything, but chapter 3 from part 3, again, which is still Discipline, right? Called panopticism. 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 The panopticon is the structure. You will see, you have pictures as well of the penitentiary, whereby you have this circular, right, structure, the tower in the center where the guard is, and the guard from within the central tower can see everything around, all the cells. The inmates cannot see the guard, cannot see each other, and so on. Opticon, optic, to see, and pan, pan, as a prefix, means everything, that you can see everything, okay? Everything becomes visible. Visibility is a trap. That's the idea that, I say that you can focus on, elaborate on in your journal entry. I mean, we can think about this today even more, effectively, in a sense, with digital surveillance, video cameras everywhere, right? I mean, where, and I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong to have or not to have video cameras and surveillance. That's not the point now. The point is how, with these devices, dispositives, right? Then where everything becomes potentially visible, then how this is again a trap. That's what Foucault says, that visibility is a trap, meaning that it is even more becomes more effective in terms of becoming a situational capture of a captivity than being actually enclosed in a cell, a place, right, from which you cannot exit. Here, the no exit situation is precisely given by by full visibility, total visibility. Okay, so again, the video camera, which is there, right, can also be off. Maybe no one is watching, right? No one is behind the video camera. Maybe the video camera is not even on, precisely, but it doesn't matter. Someone could be, someone might be watching, and that is enough to keep everybody in place, to keep, everything the way the system wants it to be. Okay, so that's basically the idea. Again, I cannot, elaborate too much on this. I just want to maybe go back to the outset of the book. I already told you about the way in which the book begins with this graphic, very graphic description of in 1757 of the public execution of the regicide. Regicide is someone who wants to kill the king, right? That's the word that Foucault uses. And then on the same page, page 3, the beginning of this section, he also uses the word parricide, which is the killing of someone who wants to kill their own father. Same idea, because the king is like the father, right, of all, and so on and so forth. So the most terrible, if you will, crime, they must be punished in the most proportionate, terrible way, according to the system of right the law. And so what's interesting now is that the articles of the time that Foucault quotes, and you will see, right, that he refers to, they keep referring to Damien, the regicide, the killer, the guy who tries to kill the king, as the patient. You will see that word over and over again, the patient, which is interesting because this is a situation in which, right, I mean, in this on these pages, that Foucault is quoting basically, the articles of the time, that you have the law, medicine, and religion coming together, in the same type of practice of punishment, right, precisely, and of control, because this is the way in which things were understood back then, before the transformation that Foucault is speaking about, the transformation in the field of criminal justice, whereby things become more effective, cleaner, quicker, and so on and so forth. But back then there was this idea of giving a spectacle and teaching people, right, precisely what happens to someone who commits perhaps the gravest of crimes, which is the killing of the king. But in any case, then Foucault goes from this execution to the second example he gives is a timetable of right, I mean, the way in which time was organized in right, I mean, the right, the house of young prisoners in Paris, where the day was the time, daily time was organized in a very detailed way, where people were told what to do every moment of the day, and so on and so forth. That is another way of disciplining, right? That's the way of inserting, right, discipline into the daily life of people, in particular in this case of inmates, in this prison that Foucault is speaking about, okay, the house of young prisoners in Paris, okay. So in any case, then he says that on page, for example, I go over some important passages on page 8. That's the difference from the gruesome, right, graphic description of the public execution and torture and dismemberment of the body of the condemned, of Damien, this guy, right, to the idea that he says, Foucault, the body, this is page 8, the end of the first paragraph, the body as the major target of a penal repression disappeared, right? Instead of inflicting all this violence on the body, to the body, it is better, perhaps it is easier, it is quicker, it is more effective to control the mind, So that's the process of internalization, whereby the rule and the discipline is internalized and people will be kept in place that way. So the important moment here, because I had to be in any case sketchy, as always, the important point is, and that's an important point in Foucault, Michel Foucault, in general, who writes on the question of, the institutions, institutionalization, normalization, what it is to become normal, to become really normalized, right? And the idea precisely is that power that we studied already, remember, sovereign power, the power of the king, the power that we saw, sovereign power that we saw already with Thomas Hobbes in Leviathan, is in a sense transformed to a degree. Is it changes, right? I mean, it's not that there is no sovereign power anymore, right? But this power is certainly, for Michel Foucault, is not only repressive. It's not a power that simply says by means of the law, says, or other means, right? Violence, the threat of violence that says no, you cannot do this, you're not supposed to do this, and so on and so forth. Okay, I hope that this is clear. This is very important. It is not simply repressive, but it has also a positive dimension, positive function. It is productive of new bodies, new people, let's put it this way, new subjectivities, a subjectivity, what a person is, new ways of living life. Okay, so it is productive in the sense that one has to actively involve oneself and proactively involve oneself in the construction, in the production of, in the constitution, the production of one's own subjectivity. Let's put it this way. I don't know if this is clear. Character, personality, whatever that is, right? I mean, it's not simply that I have to refrain, that's to stay away from doing things that are wrong, let's say, that I'm not supposed to do, but I also had to actively engage in those things that I had to do that will make me the person that I am. Okay, so this is still a function of a dimension of power, and it's very important, right? So whereby, you know, subjectivities, I hope this word is clear, subjectivity, right, what people ultimately are, right, are produced, right? So I mean, for example, in then again in a very sketchy way, but you will see in the chapter on dorsal bodies, right? Chapter 1 of part 3, where Foucault uses the example of the soldier, a soldier, and he says how the soldier of the past is different from the soldier of the 18th and 19th century, which is the professional, let's say, soldier, right, where you have precisely a very detailed, a very a specific production of the type of the soldier, the body of the soldier, and so on and so forth, right? So there is this productive moment in power rather than only the repressive one. Okay, I hope that this is clear. But in any case, to get there, just to quote a few other maybe important moments from Foucault, there are some things that I really want to mention, right? I mean, for example, I mean, certainly he speaks about these techniques. This doesn't happen by itself. It happens because this discipline and punish, right? This discipline, this modality of discipline is right, becomes successful. It becomes operative and successful through a set of techniques, right? You know, I mean, people train in a certain way so that they become then what they are, okay? So, one one moment in chapter 1 from part 1, which is important, is at the bottom of page 25. If you go there, Foucault says the last two lines, he says, these political investments over the body. So because the focus is on the body, but not in the sense it was that it was when Damien was, you know, tortured, dismembered, executed, right? This, but it is a detailed investment, like almost like, I don't know, working out, whereby then the body changes. You see results in the body by repeating the same. You know, exercise movement over and over again, right? So this political investment of the body is bound up in accordance with complex reciprocal relations with its economic use. And I'm now reading from page 26. It is largely as a force of production that the body, right, the body is a force of production. We use the body, right, I mean, to work, to produce. It is largely as a force of production that the body is invested with relations of power and domination. But on the other hand, its constitution as labor power, which is a concept that we already saw in right, doing Marx, right, is possible only if it is caught up in a system of subjection. And I skip the parenthesis, then he says the body becomes a useful force only if it is both a productive body and a subjected body. Okay, so let me, you know, say a few things about this. This is really central to understand Foucault, right? I mean, the body becomes a useful force. The system can use the body only insofar as the body is productive and subjected, right? To be subjected means to be in a position in which then one becomes obedient, precisely like the docile bodies. You will see then later in part 3, subjected, right? In a position of inferiority, in a position of captivity, subjected, right? A position of subjection, and therefore also productive. The body is productive, therefore it is useful. Okay, so this is what the system wants. Okay, and this happens through a political technology of the body. He speaks of microphysics of power. It is a matter of, like I said before, techniques to which then these disciplines amount to. Right? So then let me perhaps mention a few other things. You know, like I said, then read also the section from you know, on generalized punishment. There are many important moments in that chapter. Again, chapter 1 from part 2. For example, on page 74, the end of the first paragraph, you had this short sentence where Foucault says, instead of taking revenge, right, because there is a new constitution formulation also of criminal justice, like everything changes. This is the time in which you have, right, the time of more or less when modernity, when things change, the industrial revolution, right, so production changes, then you had the emergence, the birth of many new sciences, right, fields of knowledge and so on. Criminal justice is one. So even in criminal justice, things change. Instead of the revenge of the king, right, the sovereign king power that takes revenge, like in the case of Damien. Damien tries to kill the king, then society will, and the king himself will take revenge on that. Okay, so but now things change because it is better. It is again, like I said before, more effective, cleaner, even to do things this way, to apply the law this way, to and so on and so forth. Okay, so instead of taking revenge, I'm reading criminal justice should simply punish. Right, so you have the development of the science of punishment, and usually, of course, people don't even ask the question why punish at all, right? So, but that's basically the idea. So there is this new modality, and again, we can't read everything, but let me perhaps point out another important moment here where Foucault says, this is page 82, more or less the top of the page, where he says that this new modality, this new idea in criminal justice doesn't imply, right? I mean, he says it is not precisely not to punish less, but to punish better. Right, again, this idea of being more effective, just like in production, in the factory, you have to be more effective. Okay, it's not a question of less, of doing less, but doing things in a more uh, precise, more less costly, perhaps, and more effective way. Okay, so that's basically the idea, and then. Um, Again, remember this moment, not to punish less but to punish better. uh, and of course then you have also this idea of this is actually in the next chapter, right, that he speaks about punishment again as directed towards the other. But let me then go, to part three again, because we don't have much time. Those who bodies, I already called attention to the idea of the, precisely the obedient body, which can be then become useful precisely because of its obedience, of being subjected. Again, there is this illustration that he uses from the figure of the soldier. You will find that on page 135, and then on page 136, toward the end of the page of the middle paragraph, he says a body is docile, right, obedient, right, that may be subjected, used, transformed, and improved. Okay, so the body is now made, and as I said before, I hope that that was clear. It is made by also the active and proactive participation, involvement of the subject, of the person as such. Okay, so these methods whereby, which is a way of working, he says on page 137, in retail and detail, it's a micro type of, work that happens on the body and by means of the body, which is a way of, Foucault says, this is line 3 from the top of page 137, of exercising upon the body a subtle coercion. Okay, so then he says a few lines below, like line maybe 15 from page 137, these methods which made possible the meticulous control of the operations of the body, right? Which assured the constant subjection of its forces and imposed upon them a relation of docility-utility, docility-utility. This may be called disciplines. Okay, this is what discipline is, what disciplines in the plural are these techniques, okay, whereby in a coercive way the body is changed, is transformed, okay, and becomes really the machine that can become useful, okay, to the system and so on. This is what happens in the 17th, 18th, the 19th century, these disciplines, okay, whereby you have this docile body made. Think about this, think about what that means in terms of, also the opposite of the docile body would be precisely, the rebellious body, rebellion, right? So, in any case, then, just because again we don't have much time, the section on the precisely panopticon, the prison, right, which begins on page 195. You read some pages from that as well, right? And I already mentioned the important short sentence on page 200. Visibility is a trap, right? But here he speaks about the way in which things are regulated when something like the plague, he says, happens. And think about this in terms of today, right? The lockdown, the quarantine, the system or now that happens at the global level and differently in every country. In some countries, with greater degrees of repression, even and violence. In other countries, maybe there is more flexibility, but in any case, the way in which societies react to something like this, the plague, that's in the book by Foucault that he speaks of, the pandemic, the right coronavirus pandemic today. But in any case, these are important pages, to understand also what perhaps is going on even today, which is still, fluid, as they say. We are still in the middle of this. Okay. For example, on page 200, where you also get the sentence "visibility is a trap." And by the way, panopticon, this word panopticon, which is again, the penitentiary, like I described before, with the central tower, the circular structure around, right, and where everything is visible in every cell, right? But in any case, comes from Bentham, Jeremy Bentham, that a British philosopher that Foucault refers to. And in any case, what Foucault says, this is in the second paragraph on page 200, maybe line 4 from the beginning of the second paragraph, right? He says each individual in his place is securely confined to a cell from which he is seen from the front by the guard, by the supervisor, but the side walls prevent him from coming into contact with his companions. He is seen, but he does not see. Just like I was saying before, that's the system of surveillance, right? The video camera, right? That we are seeing, but we are not able to see back, right? So, and he is, Foucault continues, he is the object of information, never a subject in communication. And again, we can perhaps understand this better, I leave that to you to elaborate on the meaning of this in the society even today of digital surveillance. Okay, so but in any case, I hope that this was somewhat clear. There is much more, but basically the idea is that because of all the things we have seen, whatever we understand as the prison as an institution is, like I said before, extended to society as a whole. The question of therefore being normalized in a certain way, having to act and you know being proactive in producing oneself in a certain way, acting a certain way, speaking a certain way, dressing a certain way, and so on and so forth. This becomes important, right? This is what ultimately the society of discipline and then the society of control tends to, right? And the prison as such is able to become omnipresent, right? To be everywhere in society, in a sense, okay? But I just want to say a few things about, but really few, about Angela Davis. You read also chapter 1 and 2. Chapter 2, that's what I asked you to read. And actually, I gave you that suggestion to write on from the end of chapter 1, right? But chapter 1 is an introduction, and it is also, the title is Prison Reform or Prison Abolition. Think about this. Again, today, tragically, in many ways, this becomes very important, very timely. We know that today there have been cases of people being released from prison because of the situation with the virus, the pandemic, right? The coronavirus pandemic, and very often people who are deemed to be, not dangerous, not a risk, right? I mean, they have been, and many people have been people who were in prison, for example, for non-violent crimes. And one may ask the question, why are these people in prison to begin with, right? I mean, the prison is a place of violence from start to end. It's all violence. So one can ask the question, what is the logic behind the field, the science of criminal justice, of whereby someone who may also have not may have committed a crime, which in any case remains a problem to establish what that is, right? I mean, Foucault, for example, says that we in society we go too fast, too hastily from the crime to the criminal, to the stigmatization of someone as a criminal, right? The two things are not necessarily, they don't necessarily go together. So, but these are all questions for you, to consider. And why would then anyone who may also have committed a crime which is non-violent, and why would this person end up in a place which is a place of total violence, right? I mean, just to ask the question, okay? So in any case, so is it possible to envision a society, in which prison as such, as an institution, as one might say even an obsession, is overcome? Is that a possibility at all? Okay, so I leave that up to you, to read this, but in any case, in Angela Davis, there is also this moment of, important moment of tracing, the history of and the existence today of the prison from the history of slavery. You will see that there are references, implicit, maybe at times explicit, but certainly implicit, to Foucault, For example, on page 27, Davis says, this is line 2 from the top, the penitentiary was generally viewed as a progressive reform linked to the larger campaign for the rights of citizens, which is something that you also find in Foucault. And so, in any case, maybe I'll wrap this up now and um, um, read chapters 1 and 2 from Angela Davis. There are important moments, very powerful moments as well. And this idea, um, for example, I read from toward the end of chapter 2, the end of the bottom line of from page 37. She says, to be sure, I am not suggesting that the abolition of slavery and the lease system has produced an era of equality and justice. On the contrary, racism, because that's also, of course, very uh, important in understanding the question of the prison, basically everywhere, but certainly also in this society, the question of racism surreptitiously defines social and economic structures in ways that are difficult to identify and thus are much more damaging. Okay? And she also speaks about the problem of the school and very often the connection between the school and the prison, which is ultimately also an important point in general in the discourse that we have seen in a very sketchy way. I hope that this was um, somehow clear in Foucault, the question of institutionalization, normalization that takes place in society through precisely all the repressive and the productive institutions, right, of society, right, the family, the school, the prison, the psychiatric hospital, about which Foucault also speaks in other works, and so on and so forth. And next time, as we move to week 8 and we do the question of the camp, we go from the prison to the camp, and we go from Foucault and Davis to this other philosopher, Agamben. Then we will see also the question of the concept of biopolitics, that is a concept that, if it's not coined, is certainly made popular by Foucault. Okay, biopolitics, we'll speak about that next time. And again, make sure that you do the journal entry that you write on Foucault or Davis or on both of them on the question of the prison. What is your view about this very important, very peculiar but important institution that very often we don't understand? The prison that, again, where is it? The question of inclusion, exclusion, a place which is in society and yet outside of society, in which people become precisely included and excluded at the same time, very often, as we will see next time, included as the excluded ones. But I leave that, to you to elaborate on, to maybe think about this in terms of also, situations going on in society today, and in terms of your views about what these things might be in terms of not only the prison as such, but everything that is around the prison. As for example, another important writer, Michelle Alexander, in a book called The New Jim Crow, right, mass incarceration in the age of color blindness says, in a sense, I'm paraphrasing, that for some groups of people, the prison is there already before the prison, after the prison. The prison is a horizon for many people, and again, you think about ways in which the prison is really already outside society by means of many policies that are put in place, such as I just give one example and close there. The stop and frisk law of some years ago, probably now it's not technically still in place, but it is applied one way or the other, or similar policies whereby people, groups of people, in this case in the US, African American, Latinos communities are more easily targeted on the basis of precisely, racial profiling and so on and so forth, all of which are ways of, aiding in the uh, control of society, and in what we will see next time is ultimately the biopolitical paradigm of our age. Okay, so I close here. So say something, write something, say what you think, one way or the other. Okay, you can take your positions, make your arguments. Okay, and see you next time. Okay, thank you. Bye.